All right, welcome
Oh,
everyone to the workshop tonight. It's the reluctant reader using their interest to make reading fun. And if you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat, please feel free to tell us what brings you here tonight. Maybe you're a parent or an educator, maybe what grade your child is in. Um, and we'll just start in another minute. Stephanie, you want to talk a little bit about the START project?
sure. So,
Thanks.
so as my name is Stephanie Babbitts, and I am the director, the project director for START, Engaging Parents of Students with Disabilities project here at SPAN. Parent Advocacy Network. We are on as I'm joined this evening by my colleagues Beth Cosentino, who is our project coordinator, Ellen Woodcock, Brenda Figueroa, Ellie Santiago, and Mackenzie Di Maria. And we also have our guest presenter, Jamie Zibulsky, who you'll learn about in a few minutes. We are really excited that you're here tonight and excited to talk a little bit first about the START project. The START project, we work with school districts, we work with parents on engaging students and parents as effective advocates for their children around topics on literacy, New Jersey tiered system of supports, inclusive education and literacy, and parent groups. So we do a lot of work with helping parents to start special education parent advisory groups in their school districts. So if you'd like more information on that, we could provide that to you at the end. But tonight, our focus is on our other component of the grant, which is literacy. Beth?
All right. We do have closed captioning available, so please locate the live transcript button on the control bar and click on Show Subtitle to activate closed captioning. Okay, and now Ellen will share with us a little bit about SPAN.
Yes, thank you. So SPAN's mission is to empower and support families and inform and involve professionals, those that are interested in the healthy development and education of children and youth. So our foremost commitment is to children and families with the greatest need.
Thank you, Ellen. So for tonight, our meeting goals are to understand motivation, strategies to boost motivation, mindset and reading, and resources for parents and educators. So now I'm going to talk about our presenter. Jamie Zibulsky is the author of Booksmart, How to Develop and Support Motivated Readers. Jamie's work with families is motivated by her belief that teaching parents to serve as their children's teachers and therapists is tremendously powerful. We're grateful to be able to work with Dr. Zibulsky as a literacy consultant on the START team. She embodies the SPAN philosophy of empowered parents, educated, engaged, effective. And with that, allow me to introduce Dr. Jamie Zibulsky.
Thank you, Beth, and thanks everybody. It's really nice to be here, and this is a topic that I like talking about so much. So I'm really excited to talk about reluctant readers and mindset and motivation with you all. And I know we've got a small group tonight, and I also know that if you're signing on a cold Thursday night to talk about this topic in the evening, it's because something particular is motivating you. And so we would really love to have the chance during this hour to talk about whatever it is that brought you to this call, to talk about sort of the situations or questions you might have. So please do not feel shy to use the chat box or unmute yourself as we're talking so we can make this conversation most relevant to you and your circumstances. As I get started, I want to just talk about these two big ideas that Beth already introduced. And although we won't spend a lot of time on theory or background information, I do want to sort of define these ideas of motivation and mindset because they're both so important to this idea that kids can develop a love for reading at many times throughout their development and at many ways, in many ways, and that neither of these variables is an either or is just black and white. They're really both variables that exist on a continuum. And when we talk about motivation, we're really talking about somebody's drive or willingness or the incentives that they're provided to do a thing, right? And in this case, we're talking about the thing being reading. And so kids may be intrinsically or internally driven to read in general or on a particular day because they like a story, because they're excited to hear more about it, or they might be extrinsically driven to do that thing because they know their parent or teacher wants them to. They're going to get a certain grade, they're going to get a certain reward. And so we'll talk broadly about this idea of motivation and the different ways we can use and harness motivation to help kids be more willing to engage in reading tasks and more excited to do that. And then when we talk about mindset, we're really talking not just about the drive to do a thing, but the attitude that somebody has when they are doing that thing, how they approach a new task and approach the challenges that come up with that task, which is so important for something like reading, which kids are learning to do throughout their academic careers and are going to hit many stumbling blocks and many points of challenge throughout. So I think we'll talk about really the power of motivation and mindset for helping kids through those challenges. We move on to the next slide. We're going to start talking about these goals that we're going to engage in this evening. We really want to figure out how we can motivate reluctant readers so that they can move along this motivation continuum, right? And so what we've said here, if we can get kids more invested in reading one step at a time. So I really want to begin by saying that I think that this conversation is one that's applicable to all learners, regardless of their current skill level, regardless of their current interest level, because what we're talking about is really shaping behavior, making small changes to help kids feel more motivated and more confident. And we know that some of the ways that we might do that involve providing extrinsic rewards or motivators when appropriate. And so I say the when appropriate sort of with a caveat here, because we know that sometimes that's not going to be the most beneficial way to get somebody excited about reading. And we know that other times it might be really essential. I suspect this is a place where folks might have questions or comments as we go through our time together. And I really welcome you to sort of pose scenarios or talk about issues that might be coming up for you in this area. And the last thing that I want to highlight here is really that creating an environment that fosters this interest in reading is a very important thing that we can do in families to help kids sort of buy into this idea that reading is engaging and reading can be fun. And so that means, as we're all joining on a busy evening where folks are getting homework done, making dinner, taking care of other tasks around the house, we have to be really realistic about what's possible in any of our households. And so I would really rather see a child take longer to build a particular skill, but enjoy the process than be turned off by the drilling that's going on or the regimented approach to reading that is making it seem not fun for them. And so we'd really encourage you tonight to think about finding the right balance for your family and to think about this idea of motivation as one that you are building over time, that this is really a marathon and not a sprint, right? Sometimes we all feel the anxiety that we want our kids to build a new skill tomorrow. And I think any of us from SPAN are here to share, like, that's often not realistic. The world that we live in just doesn't let things happen so quickly, but there's real payoff in letting kids develop this excitement in their own way and at their own time. Again, I'll just leave a little pause here for questions, comments, thoughts that folks have. When I get started talking in general, and then especially about this topic, I can sort of just keep going. So I'll take my small pauses just for thoughts that you might have. And I know that other folks are monitoring the chat, so feel free to chime in there if you have questions or comments. But I want to talk now about some factors that keep kids motivated over time. And so some of those factors are really seeing reading as related to their life and to people who are meaningful to them. So as we've said here, that people who they value care about this behavior. And what that means is that it's important for kids to know that their role models, right? Their parents, their teachers, their older siblings or older cousins, that people who they think are cool online think reading is important in one way or another. And I know that that might be hard to display in our very digital and busy world, but really thinking about ways that we're able to talk about how cool reading is, right? And this can come about in many different ways. Earlier this year, my family and I saw The Wild Robot, the movie, which we'd read as a book a few years earlier. And so we were able to talk about this experience that we had that was more immersive and technological, but related back to a book that we really liked. So letting kids know that you care about reading is very important. Um, and then finding ways to help them feel competent as readers is also very important because we don't want to do things that don't make us feel good or that we don't feel good at. And so often we're focusing on the next skill that a child needs to build or the area where they're struggling or the thing that they need to accomplish. And so it doesn't give them a lot of time to show off what they can already do. And so one way we can support motivation in the area of reading is to really pair what we're asking kids to do with their current skill level and make sure that they're getting a chance to display those skills that they already have, because that's going to have this snowball effect and let them be more and more competent and more enthusiastic over time. And finally, the third factor that's really important here is giving kids choice, giving them autonomy. And there are so many ways that we can do that. And we'll talk about this a little bit more as we go forward, that are really feel like minute choices to us as adults, but give kids a feeling of empowerment, deciding how long to spend on each page in a book, deciding what to read first and second between a more pleasurable book and a school activity. Just giving little micro choices can be a way of reminding kids that even when they're not fully in the driver's seat, that they have some control over the situation. And so I hope that you can think about some ways that this might be relevant to your reading practice at home and ways that you can build this in a little bit more. So if we go on to think more about this idea of choice, which I think is a really powerful one, as I've said, two of the sort of most important things that we can do are really first to consider each child's interests and think about how we can let them engage in reading activities that are really exciting and relevant to them. And so I actually just left my family upstairs in my house, and I left my son reading the Nintendo Force magazine that he had recently gotten in the mail. And I share that with you all now to say I think it's a really good example of what we've said on this slide, which is that magazines, comic books, online resources can be really viable ones to think about when we're trying to encourage somebody's engagement in reading tasks that are interesting to them particularly. And so we know that often educators and families may be reluctant to have kids read comic books or graphic novels, but actually those materials often include really complex vocabulary and really sophisticated ideas. So it can be really great resources that way. And they're often really exciting to kids, right? The same is true with magazines or online resources that might focus on video games, sports, activities that children find really engaging and might not think of the same way they think about their reading curriculum in school.
Or if you have a 12-year-old daughter who really likes Sephora and Ulta, so when those catalogs come in the mail and she gets very excited and we sit together and look at the different makeup and everything from the stores, and that's good. It's a reading opportunity, right? And it's motivating her.
That's such a great example, Stephanie. Thank you for sharing that, because I think it really is when we're talking about sort of shaping reading behavior and having printed materials at home. I think that often sounds really like fancy and academic and best case scenario, right? Which is like we're sitting down and we're reading Shakespeare with our kids. But I think that that example is such a great one because it's really talking about what it means to say, like, hey, somebody I care about values this behavior and we can do it together. This is a social activity. So if you're looking through the Sephora catalog, and I don't have a 12-year-old daughter, so you might be able to come up with a better, like, relevant question than I would here. But if you're sitting with her and you say, hey, did Benefit come out with any new products this fall? You're asking her a question about the text, right? She's like referring to printed material. She's demonstrating that it's interesting to her. She's giving you information that you want. And so that really is a way to motivate somebody to read and to know that they can acquire new information from the catalog that's in front of them. And that, again, has this snowball effect, can lead to reading other related materials and digging in deeper to a topic. So I absolutely love that example.
Well, then it's also seeing the math, how much things cost, and then me saying to her, you could do chores to earn money to then buy the things that you want. So then it snowballs into that too.
And I think that's so great because we are talking about, this is very similar, maybe a very gendered examples that I'm like, and then with Nintendo and we're buying our new games. But when you're talking about how much things cost, what you're really talking about is what extrinsic motivators are meaningful to you and what does the economy look like in your household, right? So to say, okay, well, I know we need to get a lot accomplished this week and you're working on this and I'm working on that. And I can take you to Sephora this weekend, or we can go to GameStop this weekend. Here are the things we need to get accomplished to make that possible. And so we'll talk about extrinsic motivators a little bit more as we go forward, but we're not talking about bribing our kids into completing their homework or reading longer. But what we're really saying is, like, in our family, there's a social contract that we get these things done and then we get to do things we like. And reading is part of what we like, right? And reading is getting us information about what we like. So I think that's a phenomenal example. I'll pause here too, because I know there are some folks on the call from SPAN, I bet others as well, who have some great examples of other reading materials that have been highly exciting for their kids that might not be the conventional ones.
Well, yeah, I was going to mention, Jamie, that my daughter really enjoys characters that she sees on TV in books. So when she was younger, she enjoyed watching Peppa Pig. So then I knew, okay, having the Peppa Pig book is something that she also enjoyed looking at. So tying in her, interest with particular characters that she likes to see on a screen, but then having it go into the book it was very effective, and it was exciting for her then to read these stories. And sometimes they were similar to the stories, that she was seeing in the show too.
I think that's another wonderful example. And even though the focus of our conversation tonight is not so much about the, like, foundational literacy skills or building comprehension, I think the point Beth is making is so important too, because it really highlights how going deeper into a topic that's interesting to a child builds their vocabulary and comprehension, right? So if your child loves Peppa Pig or Mickey Mouse Clubhouse or Harry Potter, and you get all of these opportunities to watch it and then read it and then listen to it on an audiobook, it's giving you all of these opportunities to talk about the same topic over and over again in a way that is interesting and engaging to your child. And so you can fold in some of the skills that you want them to be building and reading without it feeling aversive to them, without giving them an experience that feels more like they are getting drilled. So I think that's another great example. The other strategy that we wanted to talk about a little bit was, again, this idea of micro choices, small choices that you can give a child when you are reading that Peppa Pig book, or looking through any printed material with them. And that really is just letting them have the opportunity to be in the driver's seat a bit. And so this is often, if you're reading with a younger child, it's often the case that their goals and timeline for a reading experience might be different than yours, right? So if you're reading one story before bedtime, you might have clocked out in your mind, like, okay, it's going to take us about 12 minutes to get through this book, and I want to read all of the pages, and then I would love to get ready for bed. And your child might get really fascinated on the third page and have a lot of pictures that they want to look at and talk about together, have a story that they want to tell you. And so when we're talking about this idea that this is a marathon, not a sprint, I think it can be really freeing to know not that you have to extend your reading session, you can still do this in 12 minutes, but you can say, hey, I'm going to stay on this page as long as this child wants to, or this topic as long as this child wants to for tonight. And when we run out of time, we'll pick the book back up again tomorrow. We don't need to get to the end of the story this evening. And so, really letting your child explore that picture or that idea or that vocabulary word is going to be more beneficial over time than racing through the story to make sure you've covered all that ground. And the same thing can be true as children get older as well. If, they've read a novel and you're asking them questions about it, sticking on the one place that they want to talk about rather than directing the activity is going to increase their motivation and engagement in the past. So we would, again, really just have you think about all of these ways that you can give more freedom in reading experiences to your child. Beth, if we move on to the next slide from here, we've already started talking about rewards and extrinsic motivators a bit. And I think Stephanie's example was such a great one because sort of Sephora and tangible rewards are so clear in that example. The advice that we would give is really that the amount of extrinsic reinforcers you need to provide in any given circumstance are directly related and inversely related to how much a child is already enjoying a task, right? So we don't need to give a reward to a child who is sitting down on page 45 of their book already and shushing everybody in the house so they can keep reading for the rest of the night. But we're talking about engaging reluctant readers. And so if you're working with a kiddo who doesn't want to get started with reading or gets frustrated after 3 minutes of reading, then we really need to think about how we can coax them into sticking with the task longer and getting the opportunity to feel more engaged and feel more competent. And so what that means is not always that we're giving our kid, money for Sephora or GameStop, but can be simply that we're giving somebody social reinforcement for what they're doing. So particularly if you've got multiple kids in your household and you have one who loves to sit down and read or likes to sit down and read, if you have the other child sit down at the same time and emulate somebody who is a more motivated reader, giving that child a lot of praise for doing this new activity might be really exciting for them, right? Even snapping a picture of them doing it, being like, I'm going to send grandma a picture of you reading that book she got you. She's going to be so excited. So finding these ways that kids can feel proud of themselves and see themselves as successful readers can be very motivating. And similarly, getting chances to talk about books and stories together can be very motivating. So with Beth's example before, getting a chance to talk about Peppa Pig with other Peppa Pig devotees can be motivating for a child. And getting a chance to talk about a story like it's a book club, right? So saying, we're going to do something a little bit special while we talk about this book. We're going to have the good hot chocolate that I have hidden away. We're going to have a snack. We're going to take a walk together. Whatever thing that you can pair that with for your child that is already motivating for them really creates this family culture that reading time is special and talking about reading together is special. Again, folks, feel free to jump in with examples too. I know a lot of you have great ones. So, if there's other ways that we can do that, feel free to join in.
I'm going to give an example because my child, who's an adult now, was nonverbal till probably 8 or 9 years old, and we used his letter recognition to help, and somewhat his reading skills to help with functional communication. For example, when we were come Christmas time, let's say, and I couldn't figure out what he wanted for Christmas, so those what was it? Walmart catalogs. Amazon used to send one out, and I think it was Target. We would sit down with those, and he would point out at pictures of the stuff he wanted. Then later on, it progressed to him circling, but we would have those conversations, sit down and increase his vocabulary by saying the words and sometimes writing them down. And then he would recognize those words in different stories that he was doing. Another thing that we did, given that we're part of the Puerto Rican diaspora, is he would call grandma and read to her and show her, look, I'm learning to read. So those were things that we did to keep him motivated. And when it comes to interests, dinosaurs were a big thing in my household. So dinosaurs taught him to make friends. They taught him to count. Any book we could find on dinosaurs, we would use to teach a skill and improve his reading. So those are some of my examples.
Thank you, Brenda. I think that's such a great example and is really a good way of like describing how you weaved reading into your life over the course of a long period of time. And I think that's what we keep going back to here, is this idea that this is something that builds on itself over time, but that it is a process. And so I think it connects really well to this strategy that we're talking about next, which is shaping the duration of your reading sessions, but doing it in a way that feels feasible and realistic for your family. And so I think what happens so often is when we set lofty goals, we don't reach them. We feel bad about it. Our kid feels bad about it. And then we stop trying an activity, right? And so if we are working with a child who is a reluctant reader and we set a goal to be reading 30 minutes a night, we say, we're really going to try it this new year. And then our child is having temper tantrums after 4 minutes, then we're going to give up because it feels futile to try for that 30 minutes. But if we know that our kid is having a temper tantrum after 4 minutes, then reading for 3 minutes and 30 seconds and then having our hot chocolate is a successful reading experience, right? And then building on from there to 4 minutes. The 4 minutes and 30 seconds can be a really powerful way for kids to feel confident and parents to feel confident too. And so I think Brenda's example was such a great one of shaping and starting with where your child is at and really increasing their capacity to engage with reading conversations, reading text from that point on. So thinking about how you can set realistic goals can be a really helpful takeaway, hopefully, from a conversation like this. So if we move on from here to talk about mindset a little bit, that's the other really powerful variable we want to talk about tonight. And so many of you have probably heard of this idea of growth mindset before. And what we really want to contrast here is this idea of having a growth mindset, believing that change is possible, believing that, we can read for 4 minutes tonight rather than 3 minutes and 30 seconds tonight, rather than having a fixed mindset, saying that because this is the way things were previously, this is the way they're always going to be. And so what I want to highlight too is that even when kids have equal ability levels to one another, kids with growth mindsets are more able to tolerate a difficult task, sustain it, engage in it over time. And so we can cultivate a growth mindset for anybody, regardless of how able they are to do a task already. So what a growth mindset really means is that we know that effort pays off. We know that we can stick with it and we will see change. And what a fixed mindset means is that we really believe that we don't have much control over a situation. We believe that folks are born with certain innate abilities and that we can't get better at them over time, that you've either got it or you don't have it. And so we, in schools and at home, can do a lot to cultivate a growth mindset for children. I have to admit that I'm squinting at our own slide here. I know that this is like a really beautiful example of the language that we use around growth mindset and fixed mindset. But if you see my face coming in very close to the screen, it's because I want to give you a few of those examples, right? Of what like my son would call this in his school. They call it SEL language, social and emotional learning language. So, I'm learning how to do this. I can give it a shot. I can learn something new. I can try hard. All of this language that says it's going to be okay. And there's lots of ways to approach this challenge versus fixed mindset language where we say, I give up. I can't do it. I'm not good at it, right? I'm bad at stuff like this. So, what we really want to think about is how we can give kids the flexibility to try at something. In fact, if we go on to the next slide from here, what we really wanted to highlight for you is why it's so important to talk about having a growth mindset when it comes to reading. And one of the reasons for this is that we know that becoming a successful reader is a process that unfolds over the course of many, many years, over the course of a child's schooling. And so that the majority of children will experience some sort of struggle learning to decode, even when that struggle is a pretty typical and developmentally typical one for them. Um, and so helping children see bumps in the road during the process lets them know that they're going to be able to overcome these challenges and keeps their egos from feeling bruised as they're becoming more successful readers. We also know that there are many children who have more pronounced challenges with particular aspects of reading, whether that's decoding, building vocabulary, understanding pragmatic language. And so we really want to help all kids feel confident and have this access point for trying when it comes to a new text or new materials, which is why growth mindset can be so important for them and such a compensatory factor, such a buffer for kids who are having struggles. So even when reading is hard, being able to say, I'll try it again, I'll stick with it, I'll ask for help, I'll work on this again tomorrow is a way to support confidence and ego development. We can go on again to the next slide from here. And what we know is that kids who have growth mindsets are more likely to be intrinsically motivated and more likely to complete tasks that are difficult for them. And that kids who have fixed mindsets are inclined to shy away from difficult tasks, meaning that they're going to need more scaffolding, more support from parents and teachers, more extrinsic motivators in order to put in that effort to a task. And so this can be important when kids are developing their early reading and decoding skills. And this can also be important when reading gets more sophisticated as kids go throughout the elementary school years and are asked to comprehend and think about longer passages as they start reading across the curriculum and math and science and social studies, being able to have a growth mindset and say, I think I need to read that again. Like, I need to look that back over. I need to talk about that with somebody, really helps them stay keyed in to a reading task. And having a fixed mindset is what makes somebody slam a book shut or move away from that task. And so a growth mindset is so important for academic reading and learning. But we also want to highlight for you that when you're reading with your child at home or they're selecting materials at home, they don't need to feel hopeless or helpless, even if they've got a fixed mindset. We can find ways to make shared reading at home more accessible for them, even if classroom reading is difficult for them. And so selecting books that are interesting to your child, that he or she can read without difficulty, even if those are texts that might be below their grade level or ones that they've read many times before, can be really empowering and really beneficial. Because especially when a child has a fixed mindset, what we want to do is help them engage in reading without starting to get discouraged, right? So picking a book that is really familiar to them, really comfortable, something that they've already mastered can be really beneficial because it's the beginning of helping them change their mindset and make that shift. So we've got a few examples for you of language that we can use around having a growth mindset and giving growth-oriented praise. And I find these examples really helpful, and having this scripted for myself really helpful, because for so many of us, our sort of natural inclination is to praise somebody for their abilities or praise somebody for their performance, rather than praising them for their effort. And so it can be really helpful to sort of take a step back from giving praise like, oh, you're such a great reader, or talking about a grade that somebody received, because this type of global praise can have a negative effect over time when we're not able to keep it up or a child doesn't believe it. So if we say, you are a great reader or you're so smart, and then somebody has struggles with the next unit in school, they can begin to doubt whether that's true. But in contrast, if we're giving really specific labeled praise about something that a child can keep doing over time, right? You tried so hard. You looked at that page really closely. I can tell that you really gave that a lot of thought. That's something somebody can keep doing again and again. And so being able to give that type of specific praise is a way to help a child begin to build that growth mindset and feel confident. So I see there's a comment in the chat box that's just related to why somebody's stepping away now. So, we have a, a little bit more information that we want to share about the resources that are available through SPAN and the work SPAN is doing. But this is a really good place now for us to pause for questions about these strategies, about motivation, or any examples that folks want to bring up for us. So we welcome your questions here.
I just want if real quick, I just wanted to give an example that I have found works really good in our house. I've got very hyperactive children at home, and the thought of, they are reluctant readers, and the thought of getting them to stay still for a long time. So I try to incorporate it into stuff. We do a lot of cooking where they have to read the recipes. I'll have them look things up where they have to do the reading for me. A lot of crafts, anything where I can, think of a reason, my hands are dirty. I need you to get that box and tell me what it says on the back, just to get them reading more. And to, it's not reading to them when they're doing that. So we've started with that and we're trying to branch out to other stuff. But, I have them read something for me to be a helper at least once a day.
I think that's a really great example. Again, when we're talking about reading being relevant to your daily life, reading being important to your family, you being competent, right? Like mom needs me to read something to her. It really touches on a lot of these things that say reading is a value our family has. It has benefit for us. And I think talking about the sort of realistic nature of like messy hands jumping around the house is really helpful too, because when we're talking about motivating somebody to read and meeting them where they're at, we don't want to say, sit down, be quiet, right? These things that might make somebody disengaged from reading again. So I think that these are all really good examples. I have a 2.5-year-old in my home. And so often when we're looking at a board book together, she is almost literally standing on my head, right? So no one should take a photograph of us for some like House Beautiful magazine. We're draped around, we're reading one page, we do a little airplane ride, we read our second page. And so I think thinking about how you're fitting in these reading activities during what looks typical for your family is really helpful. So thank you for sharing that.
I have an idea that I used with my kids. I would make a treasure hunt. Okay.
But like, and I want to go. And of course, naturally, He's been off the side and
Sorry, we
ridicule.
heard the beginning of what Julie said, and then I'm not sure if she got disrupted, but I think a treasure hunt is a great
Sorry,
example.
my
That's okay.
my I used empty Easter eggs, the plastic Easter eggs, and in
Mhm.
each one I would put a clue as to where they had to find the next Easter egg. So they had to read the clue, and as they got to be more proficient, I would make the clues less concrete. So they had to use their inferencing skills. We used it a lot just before bedtime. So one might say something about, leading them to their pajama drawer and telling them to put their pajamas on and then go brush their teeth, or find something underneath the sink in the bathroom that would tell them to brush their teeth and then move on like that. So the kids loved it. And I also would have them go up and downstairs. First clues upstairs, second clues downstairs. So they were getting a lot of exercise to try to tire them out before bed.
I love that. That's such a great example of sort of building fun and novelty into an activity that has, so many reading benefits and has the motivators and reinforcement built right into it. So that's a phenomenal example.
I was just going to share a few things, kind of reiterating what some other people shared. We do a lot of recipes like in our family as well, which also helps, of course, with math. So you're, doing two sort of things. And then my son Thomas is 10 and he's on the spectrum and he's a few years behind in reading, a struggling reader. And he's just really fascinated with the human body, especially how much he's changing. Almost 11. One of his teachers is expecting to give birth to a baby soon. So that kind of spawned a lot of interest, especially. So we've checked out some books, and even at bedtime, looking at the books, having us look up videos. So I think that's really also building his background knowledge, as well. So coming across some of those words again, when he's checking out books related to those things. And I'm trying to make more of an effort to read during the day, like on the weekends, and just, if there's some quiet time, just to kind of, I guess, demonstrate to the kids, like I'm trying to make more of an effort instead of just scrolling on social media to actually, get out books. And they were interested, the app on my phone, how I'm tracking the books that I read. So that's something I'm trying to encourage with them too. So that was a lot of things, but I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Those are both great to hear. Yep. And I think, talking about these deep dives that kids take into particular topics and really helping them engage in those topics and build that background knowledge and vocabulary is so beneficial. And I think making it really explicit, like Ellen was talking about, to say, I also like reading, right? Even, and, for some of us, it might be that you are reading on your phone, or reading on your tablet, but saying that, like, what I'm doing now is reading this article in the newspaper from our town and it has really interesting information in it, right? So again, doing things in ways that feel realistic and feasible for your family. I, like you, Ellen, I happen to read I have to read hard copy books. I'm really not good at reading on a computer. But that's not true for everybody. Some people might say, like, I'm not going to read it unless it is on my phone. So being able to sort of talk to your child about your reading practices and your reading struggles is really beneficial, because it's demonstrating that you also care about these topics and you think about these topics, and that we're all having growth mindsets and trying to build our skills or increasing our time on a task.
So I have a different type of example, I think, in that when my daughter was very young, she wanted to read the same book night after night. And not only did she want to read the same book, she wanted to read it in the same way, in the same position. And she would involve certain stuffed animals. And I mean, I couldn't tell you how long this went on. But what I think it established, when you talk about the marathon, or, Ironman, super marathon, is it established a routine. So her motivation also came from sort of this expectation of, this is what we do at night. We go up and we sit, and, eventually we moved on to different books, but just having that motivation of getting to sit there with mommy for, 30 minutes or however long it was, at night after night after night. And that continues, but for her, she needed it to be just this one specific story, or mostly it was pictures. But yeah, anyway, I was thinking about how you're saying that long stretch of time, and that was definitely part of our I think establishing her as like now motivating every night where she is, reads on her own. So
And I think that's also such a great example of when we talk about sort of extrinsic motivators to engage in reading, that we're not always talking about, money or gummy bears, but you said, like, I get to do this with mommy every night, right?
Mhm.
So, like, I get to sit with somebody and often maybe get individualized attention I don't get otherwise while we're reading together. And I know in my house, I'm a real sucker for like wanting to finish a story. So I often get to stay up later if I care about this book, right? So like I get time with an adult I really value. I maybe get to stay up a little bit later. Those are social reinforcers that might only happen during reading time. That if you say at like 8:15, can I sit on the couch with you and watch TV? You say, no, no, it's bedtime. But if somebody says, can we finish this story? Like, okay, I guess we can do that. And so that really is a motivator as well. And I think that's a great example. I know that we're at 7:50 now, and Beth, I don't want to take away from talking about the resources. So, feel free to move on and we'll see if we have any time left afterwards.
Okay, sure. So I think Stephanie jumped off. She needed to take care of something with her family. But so I just wanted to briefly talk about the bookshelf, which is all about supporting home engagement in literacy for families. And today's presentation is part of the work that our team does in partnership with the New Jersey Department of Education. We have a series of mini grants that can be used with school districts to support family engagement around early reading at home. It's for pre-K through third grade students, and our support is focused on strategies that are appropriate for all families whose children attend school, including both students who receive gen ed support and those identified for special education supports. The plans are flexible and adaptable to best support culturally, linguistically, and economically diverse families and learners of all ability levels. So we want families to build their own capacity to support their child's literacy development. So that's these flyers that I'm going to show you on the screen over the next few slides. These are all going to be included in our resource folder. At the end of the presentation, we're going to drop a link to a reflection form, which we appreciate you filling out. And once that's done, you'll receive an email with a link to that resource folder. The other thing I want to share is, so we have a texting program, and if you haven't yet, I encourage you to sign up for it to receive weekly tips and strategies and resources, again, that you can do at home with your child's early literacy development. In addition, if you are an educator, if you're here, and we also provide tips how that you can share with families and other educators at your school. And this flyer also, like I said, is in the resource folder. So these texts come out about once a week. The next thing is the World Reader BookSmart app. So I know many of us like to have hard copies, but if you are in a pinch and you're out in the world and you have this BookSmart app on your phone, you can read a book right there wherever you are. And it's a great thing to be able to pick up and have that. Maybe you're waiting in line for a really long time and your kid's needs a distraction. Well, you can give them a book from this app, and there are different languages, English and Spanish. And all you need to do is scan the QR code and then enter SPAN as when they ask for the library code when you start up your account. I also want to mention that we were part of the START team members. A few of us were interviewed for the World Readers site. They have a December newsletter that we were featured in. It's called Helping Families Feel That They Have a Voice, a Conversation with SPAN. So I've also included that link in our document for our resources if you'd like to check out that article. We have activities. It's build the skill activity pages that we've been developing this past year. They have these are in English and Spanish, and these two focus. One focuses on phonemic awareness, and the other one focuses on vocabulary. And also, we have another project here at SPAN. I'm the director for the New Jersey Tiered System of Supports for Early Reading project. And our purpose is to help families understand science-based reading instruction by providing them information through our webpage and through presentations, activity pages, and curated online resources. We also have, SPAN has a YouTube channel. So our workshops for both the NJTS-SER project and the START project can be found on the SPAN's YouTube channel. We have our playlist there. So I think I have covered pretty much everything. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Jamie, for giving us such a wonderful presentation. And I enjoyed the conversation as well. I will drop these things in the chat, or I don't know if somebody did already. The reflection forms. So if you could please fill those out. Thank you for coming. And if you don't already, follow SPAN on Eventbrite so you can keep track of all the different things that SPAN does throughout the year. We have lots of different projects and programs. So if, once you follow us, every time one is posted, you'll get an email. So if you're interested, you can register for it.